Well, I'm a fully blown Northlander, born in a little township called Awanui, north of Kaitaia, and washed up at university after 5 years at St Stephen's boarding school on the slopes of the Bombay Hills, south of Auckland. And obviously had a family. And after a stint studying in the United States of America, I ended up in the fishing industry, and that culminated in being the chair of the Sea Lords Fishing Company and the Māori Fisheries Commission. So I both learnt and still know a great deal about that noble industry called the fishing industry. When I was in my late 20s, I had the good fortune to wash up and work for a period of time with Geoffrey Palmer, Roger Douglas, David Longy, and Korowetere. So those were the totara trees, I suppose you'd say, at that period of time when Labour was the government. And then I won a scholarship and went away to live in the United States, Boston, studied at Harvard, and stayed over there for the thick end of 2 years. The Harkness Fellowship was available for, quite frankly, any Kiwi who wanted to put their hand up. And a lot of life's about timing. It's almost biblical, where the book of Ecclesiastes. Don't for a moment think that I've lived by the Bible. I'm a great one for quoting it, though. There's a great line out of the Bible, there's a season for all things. And I was at the right place, the right time. I won the Harkness Fellowship. Mr. Royce Elliott, a former senior civil servant, a vet, he was the chair of the committee. And I was fortunate enough to be accepted at the Kennedy School to do a mid-career master's degree. So it was a great sense of achievement, and I feel I brought a lot of pride to the people I belong to, my family, and those close, near and dear to me from Awanui, north of Kaitaia. Many sadly have passed away now. And I had 4 children. At that time, my wife and I went and lived in Brookline, Boston, Massachusetts. Then after the university degree, travelled all over the United States, staying in the campgrounds of America. So went from Big Sky country in Montana right down to Daytona Beach. I'd always maintained an interest in parliamentary life, but being a young father and having to provide for my family, I never actually strode into Parliament until I was 45 years old. And that came as a consequence of Helen Clark at that time and the Labour Party having confidence in me. That lasted for 9 years, and in the year of 2014, I left Labour. I walked out of Parliament, worked for 3 years as an economic ambassador, largely in the Pacific, but also the Indian Ocean and parts of Asia. And then in 2017, Winston and key people in the New Zealand First Party said, "Buddy, have I got a deal for you?" And I was privileged enough to stand in the seat of whangarei for the New Zealand First Party. And washed back up in Parliament on the positive result of 2017 for New Zealand First. I'm a deep believer in patriotism. I'm a tremendous supporter of accentuating and emphasising the values of loyalty, duty, obligation, responsibility. New Zealand First, in my view, embodies those foundational influences. Naturally, I'm a great admirer of our leader, Winston Peters. In many respects, he strikes me as the battle-hardened warrior who's prepared to re-enter the fray to set things right. Now, there's an element of romantic grandeur about that description, but it motivates me. And New Zealand First is not dogmatically committed in a particular direction other than ensuring that the overarching interests of our nation, contributing to a deeper sense of nationhood, ought to eclipse every other narrow interest, either defined by ethnicity, creed, economic segment. We, at the end of the day, have to contribute to something bigger than ourselves, and that's a sense of boosting pride, prosperity, and quite frankly, a sense of direction for our nation. What I am deeply concerned about is polarization and the weaponization of grievance culture. Look, I think most fair-minded Kiwis, they have understood the importance of recognising property rights and enabling various Māori groups to recover blocks of lost land or rights of an economic character. And then once that process has been addressed, my expectation is that those groups within Māoridom will get on and rejoin in a progressive sense the task of building our nation. Where I think the grievance mentality has become an ideology and weaponized, it's to drag, distort the treaty and unhinge it from its historical moorings. So it's now used as a franchise which weakens democracy and rewards people based on ancestry. That is not the manner in which we were brought up. And quite frankly, it is not a recipe for a unified or indeed a resilient New Zealand in the future. Well, the first thing that we need is to ensure that we don't deepen or worsen the sense that Māori are incapable of fixing themselves. You know, there's a great line out of the Bible, physician, heal thyself. My message to my own people is start by fixing yourselves. Don't look to Wellington to solve all your woes. Start by addressing what's happening in your own life, your own family, at the kitchen table, and how you're living your lives. And don't expect people to continually shell peas whilst you yourselves are not willing to make either the sacrifice or the commitment to address some of the factors that inhibit growth, either in the way you parent, either in the way you find jobs, either the way you find meaningfulness in your life. Tell me this, how come 1 in every 5 Māori are now living in Australia? They're going over there, they're finding inordinate opportunities to fulfill their potential. And a lot of them are moving away because they're sick to death of the ideology of the grievance mentality. So we need strong voices that not only is going to invert that narrative, but actually remind people that if you want to get on with life, sure, the government can help through high quality services for education and health, but the main thing is physician, heal thyself. Let's revisit 2017. You may recall 7.5% was the strength of the vote that New Zealand First attracted through an open democratic process with a manifesto. And that manifesto clearly outlined what we hoped to achieve in the event that we were restored to Parliament. There were 3 elements of significance to that manifesto. One was at least 1,800 new police. Secondly, the recapitalisation, the re-strengthening of our military. And thirdly, the creation of a provincial growth fund, a $3 billion fund to address regional deficits. So negotiations took place. On one side, we had the National Party. On the other side, we had the Labour Party. The National Party chose not to negotiate with credibility or with any meaningfulness with New Zealand First. We clearly said we've got a mandate from the New Zealand public through a legitimate process called an election. We then dealt with the Labour Party. They were willing to work constructively at that time and enable New Zealand First to achieve the manifesto outcomes that it had promised New Zealand voters it would deliver upon. We went back several times to see the National Party. Whilst they were willing to increase the number of New Zealand First caucus members who might get in the cabinet, they were not willing to find the capital to achieve the 3 things. I'll say them again. 1,800 at least new police personnel. a significant capital upgrade and rehabilitation of our military. And thirdly, a regional development fund to address provincial deficits. So the party that negotiated most skillfully and enabled New Zealand First to achieve its manifesto, which it believed derived its legitimacy from a democratic process, was why the party ended up choosing Labour. National definitely had their chance, but National both had internal divisiveness and they were unwilling to deal credibly, or quite frankly, with a sense of reasonableness with New Zealand First. You may recall that the ACT Māori Party John Key government signed the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights. Now, this document was opposed by Helen Clark. This document was opposed by Winston Peters in 2007 when he was the Foreign Affairs Minister. 2010, on the stroke of midnight, that document was signed by the John Key government. And please, I want everyone to remember, the John Key government at that stage was the ACT Party and the Māori Party. Then, once that document was signed, it became turbocharged by a group of activists, both at university and in the bureaucracy, who believed that New Zealand needed to restructure, reorientate, and quite frankly, change beyond any ordinary sense of recognition our system of political power. So He Puapua was born in a very furtive, clandestine fashion. He Puapua was not a document that New Zealand First was aware of, ever shown, and it only emerged into the world of light after New Zealand First was voted out of politics in 2020. For those of you who may not be familiar with the document, this is the recipe and the blueprint for co-governance, but it also lays down chapter, verse, and line as to how the Treaty of Waitangi should be redefined, unhinged from its historical moorings, and used to reorder political power on the basis of ancestry, on the basis of whakapapa. The Puapua report, in my view, is both unwanted, divisive, but most importantly, if any element in our political system wants to challenge and reorder our constitution, go and campaign on it. Go and ask your fellow Kiwis whether or not it's time to invert our democracy in favour of redefining the Treaty of Waitangi 180 odd years later. Not only is it going to prove to be very polarising, but in actual fact, it's inversely related. It's irrelevant to the changes that stand in front of New Zealand at the moment. No time can I think of where so many Kiwis and their associations and their linkages are under threat because of this divisive tract called the Puapua and the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights. You know, a society thrives when the social infrastructure, the soft infrastructure, is respected and safeguarded. By that I mean the linkages, the bonds, the associations we have as Kiwis. We must never allow those associations to be cut asunder by dint of whakapapa or the weaponisation of grievance culture. And sadly, Puapua is going to feed a deepening, widening mentality of grievance culture, which is why I'm diabolically opposed to it. And I would also say Puapua, as someone who speaks the language very well, means three things. Either a bandage around your arm to parry aside a blow, or the foam blowing off an ocean wave, or the private parts of a woman. So just there, you've taken the wrong name, which is, in my view, why that document will never ever see the light of day. That document will never see the light of day. New Zealand First will park that document perilously close to the kindling required to start a hāngi and set it alight. The resilience of Northland is teetering. Our infrastructure, our connectivity is hugely under threat. But there's a deeper issue that we've got to confront and deal with in Northland, and that's our social culture. That's the degradation and the decay of a sense of responsibility, a sense of obligation. You know, the North is one of the foundation blocks of the nation state of New Zealand. After all, this is where the treaty was signed. This is where the missionaries came. This is where some of the first immigrants came to New Zealand. But we have allowed ourselves in the North to be fed a diet of low expectations. So the first thing I'm going to do is to address and turn around the failing infrastructure of the North, not long-winded, colourful pipe dreams that in a short period of time we're going to build some brand new highway according to the National Party funded by the Communist Party from Beijing. No, what we're going to do is fix things within a short period of time, like a brand new road over the Brindewins, eminently fundable, eminently deliverable. Secondly, we're going also to re-establish the Provincial Growth Fund so that those areas that have suffered for long periods of time due to neglect, we can continue to address. Let me just take one or two of them, okay? Sure, roads are a priority, health services are a priority, causing people to act in a vein that enriches the North and doesn't worsen the social decay of the North. That's my motto. But at a deeper level, I say this: Northland has much potential, but it won't be realised until we attract investment. And we won't attract investment until we improve our social culture, improve our infrastructure and our connectivity. And I've got the track record of delivery. Name me one other politician who has managed to deliver $600 to $700 million worth of capital into Northland, and I'll tell you, that politician does not exist, other than New Zealand First Shane Jones. I think I bring a blend of practical experience. I was 45 by the time I washed up in politics, and I'd had not only a deep level of industry experience, I had the experience of a family, but I've always been a person, despite the fact that I was fortunate to get a good university education, I've never lost contact with my earthy roots. I've never ever been severed from the very modest circumstances that I came from in Awanui. The other thing too is far too many people are attracted to politics without the ballast of real life experience. I'm a person that brings a tremendous level of genuine, authentic, real life experience at all ends of our New Zealand spectrum, whether it's the bilingual end, whether it's the industry end, whether it's the provincial end or the international end. I have genuinely done all of those things. And I think the other thing that helps in politics is the tenacity and the boldness to say what's on your mind, irrespective of how many people you may offend, because some things are worth not only articulating, not only projecting, but they're worth defending. Like what I'm saying at the moment about polarisation and the weaponisation of the grievance mentality, very few Māori, very few New Zealanders are willing to stand up and say that. But there are legions of Kiwis who feel that. There are too many Kiwis who feel that they're being disenfranchised in their own communities and they are incapable of expressing the anxieties or the disappointments they have as to how New Zealand is travelling and the way in which New Zealand society is being racialised through ancestry. If you are fortunate enough to inherit your Māori ancestry, there's a hierarchy being developed that somehow you will get special treatment. You know, that not only is wrong, but it is actually selling quackery. Because just look at the social stats pertaining to young Māori truants, young Māori people in prison, young Māori on welfare. This cultural quackery that ancestry will deliver a recipe to uplift Māori is not only fake, but it's selling so many people short, but more importantly, it's worsening a sense of polarisation and divisiveness in New Zealand society, and it's going to, in the end of the day, it's going to undermine the bonds, the associations and the linkages that define us as citizens of New Zealand. Kia ora folks, I'm Shane Jones. I'm the New Zealand First candidate for the seat of Northland.